Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's the Billy Bragg of the Collar Drag, the Kid McCoy of Pickin' Boys. It's Jack Slack. And this is the Fights Gone By podcast, episode 48. I continue my brief stint as the most valuable free agent in mixed martial arts media. Still going with the negotiations and stuff. I'll let you know what happens. Haven't stopped writing, in case anyone was worried about that. But it was quite nice to have a week off of fight stuff and then just tune in for the fights and be really pleasantly surprised. UFC 214 was a brilliant event. Certainly every fight on the main card I enjoyed. Oh wait, no. Tyron Woodley versus Woodley and Maia. But most of the fights on the main card I really enjoyed. A couple of the undercard fights really stood out too. So it's nice that we got plenty to talk about. Won't bother doing any news this week because I've not really been keeping up on it, if I'm honest. I've been enjoying the downtime and talking to various editors. And working on a big project, which I put out a teaser trailer for on my channel. Teaser trailer was a bit more of a joke, really, than anything, so don't get too worried that I'm trying to make some art house film or anything. I just decided to put out an A24 style. Is it A24 or A24? I've never heard it said. But you know, that film company that makes all the good films. I thought I'd put out a trailer in their style. A teaser in their style, rather. Teasers are great because you can do them without any content, which is what they've been doing with all the new Star Wars stuff. You tease the start of filming. So let's talk about the fights from UFC 214. Like I said, really enjoyed it. First one that really stood out to me was Knight versus Lamas. Mainly because, well, there's a few things from this fight, but mainly Knight's chin was just ludicrous. Ricardo Lamas is a really interesting character because he seems to be firmly installed within the top 10, but anytime he fights someone really, really good, he just looks completely out of place. His fight against Jose Aldo is basically one I'll never forgive him for because he got this title fight and then he did nothing, just circled around the cage and threw wheel kicks, which came nowhere close. And it made for a very boring fight because Jose Aldo has always been happy to sit back and conserve his lead. He had a burst of action, I think it was in the fourth round, just put Lamas down into butterfly guard and immediately popped his knees through and tried to mount, and did mount him, I think. Love that knee pop guard pass. It's a Marcelo Garcia favourite, actually. It's one of those ones that you think that's too basic, it shouldn't work, but you can still catch dudes, especially no-gi, when everything's slippy. And especially if they get complacent after 4 rounds of dancing around. But anyway, Lamas gets him down. Knight plays guard. Very weird to see. He was holding onto the fence for a long old time, and Mike Beltran did nothing about it. Just gripping the fence with one hand and using it to turn his body around. Using lots of up kicks, trying to entangle the legs and really not doing very much. Little bit of the, holding the ankle and playing with the foot on the hip style guard. Normally a very powerful position. You can hit the tripod sweep is really the main thing from there. And lots of guys will try the tripod sweep and then scoot through and take the single leg X. But mainly he was just up kicking. Lamas dropped some good shots on him. I don't really like seeing guys play a lot of guard along the fence. You really want to be getting up because you're not going to win points from the bottom. Even if you're landing up kicks, judges just don't give a shit. But he does scramble up eventually, and Lamas just bites down on his gum shield and decides to start throwing. Lamas normally very conservative on the feet, but just decides to open up, and he hits. The version I was watching wasn't particularly good, but it looked like he hit him clean with 4 punches in a row, and then almost every punch after that connected on the chin. So Jason Knight has extreme durability of the face. But eventually it was stopped, and he was like, no! And the ref was like, well, if you were anyone else, you'd probably be dead by now, so I'm gonna feel okay about stopping it. But, that fight was more a big deal for me because of the holy shit, look how many punches this guy is taking square on the face. Not for anything that either really did, but still a fun fight. You don't want to see too many stoppages like that on someone's record, though. Then coming into the event, you had the cursed fight between Robbie Lawler and Donald Cerrone, which had been cancelled, I think, twice already, or moved back at the second time or something like that. As George Foreman said at the Rumble in the Jungle, it has not been postponed, it has been rescheduled. It will happen when it was supposed to happen. and no one argued because he was George Foreman and terrifying. But yeah, I was cautious about this one. I was like, there's so much potential for this to be a letdown. It is only 3 rounds. It could turn into a point match. Could just be nothing that we thought it would be, because you got two. You can have 2 of the most exciting fighters in the world fight each other, and that will somehow cancel each other out, and there'll be like a boring clinch fest, or something like that. But this one absolutely lived up to the hype, and by the end of it, I was like, why did we book this for 3 rounds? This was a terrible decision. Not the decision that the judges rendered, which I can't actually even remember, but the actual fight was terrific. Robbie Lawler came out right off the bat and got in Cerrone's face, almost off the glove touch. I would always be cautious about doing that sort of thing, because it feels like a dickhead thing to do if you go too soon after the glove touch, but he got right on him, and it was that same sort of thing that Eddie Alvarez did. Once he got the single collar tie, he just started wailing in the uppercuts and right hooks, and Cerrone was like a rag in the breeze. Once you got that head bent down a little bit, it becomes a lot harder for that guy to start throwing knees, and you can just sort of tee off on him. As the fight progressed, Cerrone was doing a much better job of staying upright. Lots of clinch stuff in this fight, and it was all really exciting, dynamic clinch stuff. There was no grinding for position. It was like a tie clinch, but without the long periods of not much happening. They were both working knees to the body beautifully. Any time that Lawler came in with the single collar tie, Cerrone would take the single collar tie and he'd have that elbow really pulled in flush to his ribs, and he'd be pushing the same side hip almost up, trying to be as tall as possible, just to try and prevent Lawler from hitting the body as much on that side. Kidney punches. We're going to be talking about them a lot in coming weeks, because people are going to be asking me about the quote-unquote Philly shell. I like to call it the stone wall, but people are going to be asking me about that a lot. So kidney punches are going to come up a lot, but they really do take their toll if you take a few of those. Really famous Sugar Ray fight versus, was it Hecht? German guy. And Robinson had been fighting under rules where the kidney punch was legal, but where they were fighting, the kidney punch was illegal, or the other way around. But anyway, there's a kidney punch knockout, and it gets really... the guy comes in basically with his flank exposed, and Robinson just hits him about 5 times in the kidney with, while holding with the other hand, and it's very controversial. But yeah, Cerrone was doing nice work with knees. Lawler was doing nice work with knees. What you saw was Cerrone ducking in for takedowns to stop Lawler walking in on him, because obviously Cerrone's big problem is being crowded, and by trying to take Lawler down, well, he succeeded, I believe, on his first attempt, or at least his second, and did some good work on the ground. Very, very good groundwork, Donald Cerrone, generally. He's got one of the most recent high-profile triangle choke finishes, because those never happen anymore. Really good guard. I was surprised how good his guard passing and his top control looked in this fight. And he can take guys down quite well. We think of him as the striker with the defensive or the attacking jiu-jitsu from the bottom, but his takedowns are legit. I believe he took Cote down. Did he take down Oliveira? He's taken down some good guys. But yeah, just that simple act and shooting them, ducking in for the hips constantly when Lawler was coming in, really messed with what Lawler was able to do. Lawler had to start standing back a bit. Towards the end of the second round, he was standing out in the open. That pressure had sort of disappeared because of the worry of Cerrone ducking on his hips. Did show a really nice southpaw Robbie Lawler, so he threw a left straight and stepped into a right knee, which just came straight up from his stance and hit Cerrone in the head as he ducked in. That one made me gasp when I saw it. You don't really see the lead knee picked up and land effectively very often. It normally relies on really being able to read what the other guy's doing and knowing that he's going to bring his head down. That's why that Frank Mir one against Krokop is such a special knockout, even though the fight was abysmal. Great bodywork from both guys, great kicking from both guys. Really enjoyed it. And then Henry Hooft came in between rounds, and he is a giant. You forget, because all Dutch people are giants, but he's a really big dude. And then Lawler's corner were calling, boy got no liver, hit him in the body. And this, I was reflecting on this after, forgot to mention the really nice elbows from Donald Cerrone, pushing off from the clinch. Those Platinum Mike style elbows, as I'm going to call them now. So that even if he achieves nothing else in his career, he's remembered for that. But watching this fight, I it really hammered home to me that Donald Cerrone is a guy with some very significant weaknesses that on paper every opponent can look at and say, I'm going to jump in right on that and exploit it relentlessly. There's the fact that he really doesn't like pressure, that he's a really slow starter, and that he really can't take a body shot very well. He's very famous for not being able to take a body shot very well. In fact, he's very famous for all three of those things. But he's such a good example of a guy who has these shortcomings that he's really struggled with his whole career, but he has built a technical game that allows him to steer clear of those things, and worst comes to worst, he can get out of them a lot of the time. Adding the intercepting knee, which his corner were calling for a lot during that fight, adding the occasional upward elbow interception, working on his footwork a lot. His hands continue to improve and surprise me, because he used to have that Alistair Overeem thing where he's just flailing these flappy shots, and really every time he punched he was just opening up more chances to hit him. But more recently he's looked really much crisper. And I think just for, the average person isn't going to be able to absorb the shots that Donald Cerrone does, but for the average person wanting to improve their game, Donald Cerrone is a brilliant example of a guy with obvious physical shortcomings and mental shortcomings that he has built technical answers to in his game. I would consider him close to an all-time great at lightweight. He didn't ever win the title, but he was there beating the best for a very long time, and just a really interesting character in his fighting style, at least. And then Robbie Lawler, I found out this week, is the first person to win a UFC title after accruing double-digit losses, which is a really fantastic thing to think about when... Well, actually, it's a good thing to think about when you're worrying about your favourite fighter not retiring after loss after loss. Because at least there's that bit of hope that they'll be the next Robbie Lawler. Except Robbie Lawler never really suffered too much punishment. He was always, it'd be things like getting quickly guillotined by Jake Shields or losing decisions to guys. He was always a sort of a player, a power player in whatever weight class he was in. But he did fight at middleweight for a long time where he was far too small to really compete with guys like Tim Kennedy and, those other big guys who just have so much weight on him, or size rather. So I really love that fight. I wish it had been for 5 rounds. An absolute banger. You don't get fights like that too often. Then you had Woodley versus Maia, which... I'm going to get this out of the way up front. Technically, awesome that Woodley could deal with the takedowns so well. People will, defend his performance based on that he didn't throw, lowest attempted strikes or something in a 5-round title fight. But the most hilarious thing about this, and, I'm going to get butthurt people telling me about this in the comments now, but almost everything in this fight was identical to the Anderson Silva one. You had the guy stuffing all the takedowns, refusing to throw strikes, and Damian Maia's face got busted up on almost the first punch of the fight. And I pointed this out on my Facebook. I just put up, if Tyron Woodley had danced between his not doing anything, people would have started talking about how he chose not to finish Maia, which is what people did about Anderson Silva. After Anderson Silva danced and refused to throw more than 60 strikes. Oh no, I think he landed close to 60, but almost all of them were to the legs. Just didn't really want to get involved. It was really one of the first performances with the low-line sidekick and kicks to the calf, round kicks to the calf of the lead leg. Just stuff that guys can't grab a hold of. And he was doing that and then dancing for about a minute, and then he'd throw another strike. But people used to, after that fight, Anderson Silva was like, oh yeah, he said something before the fight, so I decided I was going to punish him. You're like, really? You were going to punish him by not really hitting him that much? But people believed it. People bought it. And there are still people out there who defend it as like Anderson Silva choosing to make a fool of Damian Maia rather than Anderson Silva refusing to engage for most of the fight after catching Maia with a couple of good shots to the face and then jogging around the octagon for the other rounds, tiring himself out by dancing. In fact, this is your challenge this week. Actually, I do have an actual challenge for you later this week, but watch Anderson Silva versus Damian Maia and imagine if he were, all the time that he's dancing or showboating, imagine he was standing like Woodley was. And you'll see that it's basically the same fight. except more takedowns attempted and stopped. So if anything, Woodley's performance was more impressive is what I'm saying, and you should really get butthurt about that right now and write me letters. No, both fights were bad. You're allowed bad fights, but this is now Woodley's second in a row. The first Thompson fight was pretty good, but again, he's not a very active striker. He doesn't throw a lot of strikes, and I felt bad for saying this beforehand, but before this fight, and then it turned out to be an all-time stinker, but I can't remember a Tyron Woodley fight that he won where he didn't knock the opponent out that was entertaining. He either knocks him out early or is really boring in the process. There's only so many times you can repackage the right hand and not get it done. So it hasn't really helped his case on the hunt for money fights, but as of the time of the recording of this podcast, it's just been announced that Bisping versus GSP is now on for UFC 217, so looks like Woodley's not getting his money fight against St. Pierre, and Whittaker is going to be holding the interim belt for another year. Then you had Cyborg versus Evinger, and I'm going to surprise you. I enjoyed this. I don't normally enjoy Cyborg's fights. Most of her career has been beating up 135ers who weren't good enough to make it into the big promotions, but were paid by whoever she was fighting with to go up in weight and fight Cyborg, or rather be fed to Cyborg. But I thought she looked decent, and it really hammered home this fight for me that she came from this shootbox lineage where she'd run forward swinging, and it was all about showing heart and this, that, and the other. But she seems to have channeled that into a real willingness to learn and improve. And you saw that with her going to, was it the Mundials? She was in a big competition as a purple belt and suplexing people in jiu-jitsu. But she's training with really good boxers, training with really good wrestlers, and she just all around looks like she's improving. And I was really impressed with her patience in this fight and her picking of her shots. She still does things like leads with her face, and her head is forward of her hips a lot of the time, and it looks really weird. And then I saw in the corner that she had Perillo, and I was like, oh, fair enough. The guy who improved Michael Bisping's boxing has come over to improve Justino's boxing. But I thought she looked good, in terms of having a last-minute opponent who was a 135-pounder again. But I also thought Tonya Evinger didn't look too uncomfortable at the weight. I mean, she didn't look nearly as thickly muscled as Cyborg, but she's not particularly thickly muscled anyway. She's tall, even for that, even against Cyborg. And once she was a little bit more confident throwing her jab out there, that was connecting, because Cyborg doesn't have a lot of head movement and doesn't really take a counter defense all that often. I'm going to shock you. 2 years' time, if you got Tonya Evinger in with some good coaches and you allowed her to train full-time as a fighter, because she's been fighting for, paycheck to paycheck on really small shows. Well, Invicta's not that small, but still not the UFC for a very long time. If you gave her the time and bulked her up a little bit and the right coach, I reckon she could really give Cyborg trouble. I know, let that sink in. She was doing things that were sort of smart, but doing them in a way that was getting her hurt. She kept going to the low kick because Cyborg has that lead leg out there all the time, but every time she threw the low kick, Cyborg would take the low kick and step in with the right hand. Part of that is Evinger, not laying down on the kick and not having her hands in position to deal with anything if it did come back. But switch that out for the Jon Jones strategy of just stomping on that lead knee, or Anderson Silva, or whoever else, Conor McGregor, anyone else you like who likes to jam people from stepping in like that. Then you got the makings of a good strategy. Holly Holm style oblique kick, lovely stuff. Stops people stepping in when they want to step in. She had the reach, and she landed a couple of good jabs in this fight. Landed a nice right hand in the third round, I think it was. Her head movement looked awkward and awful, but, physically she has the build to be troubling to someone, to be troubling of someone who is a straightforward brawler like Cyborg. She did well in the clinches. She took Cyborg down in the opening round, and I don't think she got her down again, but she did, every time she got caught on the fence, she'd tie up and start trying to work on Cyborg. And I think she had the right idea, but just the wrong execution in terms of... And, there was an obvious skill gap, too. This is a person who's been paid almost nothing to fight versus a person who's been billed as the champion forever. But she was doing things where like she'd jog around the cage, and that's something where a fighter it looks like they think they're making the opponent work to like keep up with them, but really all you're doing is jogging around the cage and making yourself work while the other person stays there. So I think she had the right idea, the Billy Conn sort of hit and move and tie up when he can, make stuff happen, keep Cyborg working, but she didn't really achieve it. There were long breaks where she'd be jogging around the cage and Cyborg wasn't really doing anything. So yeah, I mean, no one ever thought that Evinger was going to win this fight, but I was surprised that she didn't look tiny at 135. I mean, obviously it's only a 10-pound difference, but 10 pounds of muscle is a big difference. 10 pounds of dehydrated muscle is a big difference. But I was really impressed with her toughness, the grit, the fact that she kept going. Her striking needs a lot of work. But I think she definitely deserves a fight in the UFC's bantamweight division, because we've still got Betch Correia around. So like, even before this fight, how are you maintaining the argument that she didn't belong there? But yeah, it'd be good to see her get some more matches, and all the best to her. If she stays at 135, as tall as she is, and does start stomping on people's lead legs and using the jab well, I think she could really be a force in that division as a striker, let alone as a grappler. When you've got a range advantage, there's not an awful lot you need to learn to really start taking advantage of it. He says, then remembers Stefan Struve, but Jon Jones was picking guys apart with just a few tricks in the beginning. He's improved and become a much more rounded striker, but just with the low-line side kick, he was, and the oblique kick, and a good few body kicks and head kicks, he could really ruin guys who'd been touted as excellent strikers like Rampage. Not comparing her to Jon Jones, obviously, I'm just saying in terms of build for the division, the long gangly person. Yeah, so that division is going to continue just being a mess. It was brutal listening to Dominic Cruz and Joe Rogan just slate Jermaine Durandamy on air. But, what are you going to do? If you've avoided the fight, you're probably going to get a kicking at some point, verbally. So the big one was Jones versus Cormier, and I've got to say I really enjoyed this fight. And I thought Daniel Cormier did an amazing job of going forward and still dealing with the kicks, especially the low-line kicks. He did a really good job. He was doing that thing where you retract the leg into the stance, throw your hips back a little bit and let it fall short. Standard like Saenchai answer to low kicks. And he was also picking his knee up and keeping it nice and bent and wedging it into the front of Jones's foot when he threw the kick. Lots of hand fighting. He was eating a few left straights down the centre, which really made me uncomfortable watching it. I was like, ooh, could get hurt with one of those. But the hand fighting was really cool because he was, when Jones was orthodox, Jones reaches with his hands all the time looking to roll the elbow over. But DC would tap the hands around, get him into hand fighting and then throw that long loopy left around. And he was just working like the jab hook and just keeping Jones's right hand coming out of position, moving back into the guard, and just making him play catch up on that. And a lot of those big right hands and things like that came off like either hand fighting to the left hook to the right hand or hand fighting to the jab to the left hook to the right hand. So that worked really well for him. In fact, he was throwing like double left hooks off the hand fighting. I really, really liked DC's right hand to the body. I think he threw 16 body strikes in this fight and landed 12 of them. So didn't really do as much as I would like to see, but landed with a tremendous effect there. And he did. It was clear that he was going to the body. It wasn't like he was just going, okay, I'll occasionally go to the body. Like you see a lot of fighters, they'll throw the odd body shot just to change things up. But it was clearly part of his strategy to go to the body. I just wish he'd gone, pushed it a little bit further. But that right straight to the body was really lovely. He was going jab, right straight to the body, coming up with the left hook, and particularly along the fence, I really like that one. The right straight to the body along the fence is gorgeous anyway because the stance shortens as the opponent gets towards the fence. Jones has a real habit of shortening his stance, like ready to either throw up the knee or wrestle or whatever. He squares up a lot as opposed to the long-bladed stance he uses out in the open, particularly to sidekick. Didn't really sidekick much this fight, but he does like to generally. The other thing I like about the right hand to the body, in terms of like jab, right straight to the body, is that the movement is basically the same as the jab and duck, which I think I talked about a lot about coming into this fight. Jab and duck is just a great way for the shorter guy to get in. You flick the jab out right in their face, and immediately, as it's coming back, you're already ducking into a position. Maybe you slip your head off line a little bit, one way or the other, but you're ducking down, and you're not where you were originally. So if they've taken the jab, or they've been blinded briefly by the jab and they throw something back, you aren't in position to take it. And then you can throw, your next punch will be a counter on an opened up opponent. Roberto Duran landed dozens of wide rights with this, right hook to the body. And then when guys started to keep their elbows really tight whenever he threw out the jab, he'd land the 1-2, and you'd be going, how is he landing straight 1-2s on guys as good as this? But that's how he did it. It was just jab, duck, and try and hit the body when they lashed out in return. And then he'd throw the 1-2 late in the round and try and hurt him. Davey Moore, that's a great example of that fight. Roberto Duran versus Davey Moore. But yeah, you saw that in this fight, the jab to the right straight, and I think Jones was throwing back at the time, and he came up with the left hook. It was really nice. Yeah, I thought it was great, and DC even started stamping in his own oblique kick to the knee, which was nice. Jones hitting some lovely knees, intercepting on the way in. The wrestling was great. It was really good to see DC not worry too much about the uppercut. In the first fight, he was clinging to the collar tie and loading up the bus driver uppercut. And by the third and fourth round, Jones was just holding on to the right hand for dear life. This time, he looked like he was... Every time they hit the clinch, he'd go, okay, I'm wrestling now. And then if he could land the odd shot, he would. But it meant that he wasn't wasting energy. He wasn't getting handled so much in the clinch as he was in the first fight. And he just looked really much better there all around, to be honest. Jones hit an early trip, but DC had, was it both underhooks? Or certainly had one underhook, which he just jacked up and rolled over and came out on. Yeah, I think the sad part about this is that this was the best DC has ever looked, in my humble opinion. His boxing looked more varied. He looked confident. His dealing with the kicks was far better than the first fight. Jones was digging left hooks to the body and things like that. The body work was a constant feature of Jones's game plan. But, he wasn't landing these big, long kicks there. When he was throwing front kicks, they were getting parried. When he threw his low-line side kick, his oblique kick, DC was either picking his knee up and coming straight in afterwards, or retracting the leg and then stepping back in. I thought DC looked phenomenal in this fight. In fact, I thought he was giving Jones a very hard time, but that left high kick was timed beautifully. Caught DC ducking into it, and the finish was absolutely brutal. Just watching him go wild with blows like like Yoel Romero versus Lyoto Machida, when a guy has the energy to just explode like that, out of nowhere. It's really quite scary. Lots of stuff in the aftermath, about people posting pictures of DC crying. I think that's because mainly Jon Jones's fanboys are sort of like edgy atheists, the edgelords, who are really only there to tell you how much your religion sucks or something like that. A lot of Jones fans are just people who want a rise on Twitter, and you're like, okay, we get it, you're edgy. You're like the best fighter in the world, well done. Jon Jones, pretty much terrible as a human being. I watched the Joe Rogan podcast with him on, where he's talking about the drunk driving incident, and he manages to spin this woman's baby that did he kill a fetus? I can't know. That was Rampage. He manages to spin this woman's baby that almost dies into being about him. It's amazing. It's just dude's a sociopath, probably, or certainly a narcissist, but he is easily one of the best fighters I've ever seen. The dude can fight. And has a tremendous aptitude for learning and for applying a game plan. So a brilliant night of fights, I thought. Very excited for the future of that division. Oh, I forgot to talk about Özdemir, Ivan Ooze, which is my new nickname for him. No, his new nickname is No Time. And I have now seen 2 of his fights, and I know nothing about him. Another really quick, weird knockout from punches that you probably wouldn't imagine knocking dudes out, or certainly would be easier to defend for a really good wrestler like Jon Jones or Daniel Cormier. But I'll happily. There's something about that, like what's it called? Aslan Amagov, the guy who just retired out of nowhere. I think of his last knockout. His last knockout was from an overhook. He just slapped this guy with like 5 punches from the clinch and knocked him out. It was amazing. There's something about knocking a guy out from those close-in positions that's very hypnotic. So yeah, excited for Özdemir, but I will need to dig deeper in his fightography before I can tell you anything useful about him. But it looks like he'll probably get next in line. Or they'll make him fight Gustafsson, probably. One or the other. Next in line for Woodley, not really sure. Lots going on in that weight class. I mean, I'm still of the opinion that he hasn't shown anything that leads me to believe that Rory McDonald could not operate the same game plan as the first time around and win that fight. Still stands on the fence, still comes off the fence swinging right hands. Doesn't do a whole lot else. But is, still good enough that he can beat almost everyone in the world. It would be really interesting to see him versus McDonald again. But McDonald is over propping up Bellator's rapidly improving welterweight division. Right, there's not a lot going on this week, so we're going to do a good few questions. Hello, Jack. You are the Jury Miles of the British Isles. I don't know what that is. My question is, despite being a relatively high percentage low-risk technique, knees to the body in side control seem underutilized to me at the highest levels of MMA. To me, a firm head and arm grip with strong shoulder pressure or a reverse scarf hold seem like great opportunities to lace devastating strikes on the oh-so-tender ribs of your opponent. I have personally had much success with this in practice. Can't recall anyone using this to much effect other than GSP versus Sarah. Stay golden, you fine chap. Your boy forever, Stefan. I hope that's not Stefan Struve after what I just said about his reach. Knees to the body from side control. That's one of those things when you see them landed well, you're like, oh, why do we never see that? Which is exactly the point of this question. But Overeem used to do them occasionally. Oh no, he landed one good one on Brett Rogers. I really miss knees to the head from side control. I feel like a lot of the stuff from side control really opens up when you've got knees to the head. Because, a lot of guys, that near forearm will be wedged on your hips the entire time. And if you start, if you turn your hips towards their head and start trying to chuck in knees over the top, you can really bring that elbow out of position and start working up into what we call shitty side control, with the elbow out, where you can start mounting and things. I would imagine it's mainly that near arm that's going to be causing most of the problems, or making people feel like they can't go for the knee. Certainly, when I've tried this, I feel like that near elbow and forearm are always there in front of my hips, and it makes me feel awkward trying to throw in knees. And then if you try and put too much power into it, you give them that opportunity to bump into you and get the knee back in. And then if you've got the elbow clear of the ribs, I suppose you've got really good target there to knee, but you don't really want to give the guy any space to get that elbow back because it's a bit of a pain in the arse getting it out there in the first place. I would say that generally knees to the body are underused on the ground. I remember the Shogun versus Coleman 2 dreadful fight. Shogun catches a double collar tie as Coleman's on his knees and knees him in the sternum. And they stopped the fight because they thought it was to the head or something like that. But that's how rare it is. And then Rashad Evans hit Tito Ortiz with a very similar one. Anderson Silva's knee to the sternum of Chael Sonnen. Knees to the body are terrifically underrated generally, but in a standing clinch, you're dealing with someone moving you around, so you can't get the power in them. On the ground, you'd think that there'd be a lot more opportunity to. But I think on side control generally, I think the problem is mainly going to be you don't want to just be kneeing some guy in the hip or the love handle. You really want to get the ribs, and to get the ribs, you've got to get the elbow off the rib cage, which is half the battle from side control anyway, and then you're almost into Darce, mount, whatever you like doing from that opened up position. But I'm going to have to ask some other guys about that, because that's an interesting question. Cheers, Stefan. Senior Slack, greetings from South Florida. I'm your newest Patreon boy. Oh, good, thank you. I'm glad to contribute if it helps you provide all this great content. Oh, keep up the great work, really enjoy it. Okay, thank you. I'm curious if you have any other YouTubers / podcasters that you enjoy, respect, or despise. Christ. Other than you, for analysis of combat sports, I frequently listen to or watch content from Lawrence Kenshin, Wilson Caden, and Brendan Schaub. Also, I use boxing training for fitness, and I want to make sure that I'm getting my instruction from the best YouTubers. I normally watch Johnny from Expert Boxing and JT Van V, and Bang Muay Thai and Joseph Valtellini. Any direction would be appreciated from Mike. Yes, get on Joseph Valtellini's YouTube channel, because since retiring from Glory, he's just been putting out tons of great content for free. Thinking about it. Yeah, LK, Lawrence Kenshin, BJJ Scout, Heavy Hands Boys, Brendan Dormer. I mean, there's the usual list of guys I go through. Robin Black, Faraz puts out amazing technique videos, so well, then he's one of the best coaches in the world, so he's definitely worth your time. Faraz's guard retention video has helped me amazingly. As someone who used to not invert at all, I now love letting the guy sort of almost pass and then inverting to try and attack his leg. He puts out amazing content on everything. Brendan, people keep saying Brendan Schaub, but Brendan Schaub, I think, is a genius. He might be, because he started putting out his opinion very publicly that McGregor would win, even though he probably doesn't believe it against Floyd Mayweather. But by being the only guy saying it, he moved himself into a position for a really lucrative and high-profile gig with Showtime. Sort of like Skip Bayless. Sort of exactly like Skip Bayless. In fact, isn't Skip Bayless just famous for... Didn't he basically just ride Jordan's coattails up by being a Chicago sports journalist at the same time that Michael Jordan was around? In which case, you got the UFC heavyweight who just happened to be moving into podcasting around the time that Conor McGregor was around. No, Brendan Schaub doesn't make bad points. Like, sometimes he does, but I won't laugh too much at Brendan Schaub. He's a guy who knows... He's going to be able to beat up probably 99.9% of the population as an accomplished heavyweight. But there's only so many times I can hear gadoosh and that Conor McGregor will land punches and win rounds. It's hard work listening to that. Other YouTubers I enjoy. Resnick is my man for highlights, makes very good boxing highlights. Hands of God makes really good boxing highlights. There's a guy whose name I believe is Dan, but I have now immediately forgotten it now that I want to talk about him. But he does a great series of BJJ videos. I believe the most recent... Well, he did one on framing, and he's done one called Becoming a Headhunter. Those are brilliant. Look them up. If you just look up the titles and subscribe to the dude who made them. I can't remember his name. There's tons of guys who've only done a little bit of stuff and then stopped. It's really sad. Like, there's a guy called Complete Sky or Complete Ski. Maybe he's Russian. But he made... a study of the Meows through their 2016 year, and it was in 4 parts, and it was the best thing I've ever seen on the Meows. And it basically challenged the idea that they're just berimbolos. So I believe part 1 was the guard, part 2 was the passing, because they've really started getting more into passing now that they have to do that to win competitions. Part 3 was the differences between the two brothers, and then part 4 was the best rivalries. And as they're often painted with the same brush, I thought part 3 was really interesting. But I think he set them all to private now, which is a bit sad. Though I've bookmarked them all, so I'll just keep going back to them. But yeah, he was really good. And in fact, he did a really good thing on Shinya Aoki's passing. There's tons of good stuff out there. Just search anyone and study, and you'll find a couple of good guys. Hi Jack. We all know that Lomachenko has amazing footwork and pivots. I wanted to talk about an aspect of his striking. In his combos, many of Loma's punches aren't full strength. He'll throw some fast but not hard punches to set up true power punches. Could this be used more in MMA? Why isn't it? MMA fighters seem to throw everything full strength except the jab. Loma's staccato punches are effective in forcing defensive reactions and creating opportunities for real power shots. And unlike feints, you can score points with them. It also lets you maintain higher punching volume without tiring. I'd think that with smaller gloves, even 70% punches would have sting to them. Thoughts? ? Thanks, Jack. Love the podcast and the articles. From Holden. Yeah, I think one of the issues in MMA is that it is hard to no one really covers up and stands still in MMA. Anytime you show someone anything, they're going to run a mile or duck in for the clinch. Boxing, there is more of a willingness to stand in front of someone because too few fighters go to the clinch with any regularity. This is why Floyd Mayweather does so brilliantly defensively. He limits the number of exchanges, and if he doesn't like an exchange, he'll just step into the clinch. But if you watch the Diaz's, they had success with this. Well, no, mainly Nick Diaz had success with the same sort of style. Nate is more of a distance fighter, but Nick really did well. When he trapped guys along the fence, if they covered up, he'd just be going pop, 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 pop. He had the success out in the open with his jab and his left hand, because he's a southpaw. Yeah, he's a southpaw. Again, volume, just pop, pop. Michael Bisping, another great example of a guy who throws like half-assed punches. But really, a lot of MMA fighters, there's not an awful lot of opportunities to hit guys. If you look at Chocolatito's punch stats, he landed over 1,000 punches in one of his fights, which comes out at like almost 100 punches a round. that doesn't happen in MMA. You know, there's so much other stuff going on, and everyone's moving away all the time. Anytime Fedor said this actually. He said in MMA you need to cover ground with your punches, because where in boxing everyone is trying to stay in range to slip and counter or deal with stuff, in MMA you are either attacking or you're retreating. There's no middle ground, and the guys who do effectively use that middle ground are the ones that really we worship as gods as strikers. But it's not even like kickboxing. In kickboxing there's a lot of covering up, standing on one leg with the gloves up on the earmuffs. It feels like to a fighter, or just generally, you know, the logic is sound. If you're not going to be able to get close enough to hit the guy many times, why bother throwing any light shots, you know? And the guys who do throw the light shots and use the volume, like Nick Diaz and Michael Bisping and so on, they tend to be the guys who are comfortable getting into range over and over again and aren't particularly worried about getting hit. Have fairly good either defense or ability to absorb a punch. But, you know, as much as we rag on people who are talking about different distance in MMA and boxing when they're talking about McGregor-Mayweather, the distance is very different. And in kickboxing too, like, no one stands still in MMA near their opponent unless they're hurt or really tired. Right, let's do Fight of the Week, and then we'll have a quick plug, and then we'll get into some other stuff. This week we've got a few fights of the week, actually. I'll do the first ones now, and then I'll do the second ones that are linked separately later with a challenge to my viewers, or listeners rather. First fight of the week, I picked Roger Gracie versus Buchecha, which happened, I believe, last week or the week before, but Roger Gracie came back from a 5-year retirement against Buchecha, who I believe just equalled his record for world championships. I believe Buchecha's at 10 now as well. Which is between absolutes and his own division. Buchecha has like 20 pounds on Roger Gracie. Their first fight at Metamoris was amazing, and they've been like teasing the rematch for years, but Roger Gracie's been doing things like MMA and just sort of and teaching a lot too. Actually, if you ever get down to that gym, it's amazing, Roger's place. But the rematch was really, really interesting. Like, there was about 5-10 minutes of arsing around on the feet with neither man being able to achieve anything. And then I believe it was Roger pulled guard, and Buchecha had his knee through. If you've seen any of Roger Gracie's career, one method of breaking the closed guard is to stand up with, you know, control of the biceps or the armpits, and squat down so that you're in combat base, and their pelvis basically slips over the top of your knee, so you're now inside their closed guard with one knee. And that is a position that Roger Gracie has been able to sweep dudes from his entire career, because he's got very, very long legs, and dudes will go to it because they want to open his guard. He can also like just snatch it up when guys are in combat base. So he snatches it up against Buchecha in their first meeting at Metamoris. Buchecha did this thing where he put his knee down to the opposite side, in like a knee cut position, and then he grabbed Roger's heels behind him and rolled through, and then rolled back to catch the other leg in like a knee bar / tornado sweep position, and he had really good success with that in their first match. This time he can't get his hand free to do it. Roger's on his sleeve the entire time, and then he does roll, and Roger comes up on top of him and takes his back. Really cool sequence. Roger gets the chokes out Buchecha, you know, the younger version of him after a 5-year layoff. Everyone goes wild, and it was really impressive. So, of course, when you get in the gym the morning after, everyone's abandoned the new age shit, and everyone's trying to collar drag you from closed guard. Oh, sorry, sleeve drag you from closed guard. Really cool. And then the other one that's linked to that was, I was just watching through some old Buchecha matches just for fun, and I totally forgot that at ADCC he and Gary Tonnen had a match. Gary Tonnen is 5'8" and I believe a lightweight, or maybe even smaller. And Buchecha is 230 pounds of sexy Brazilian brilliance. And it's a really interesting match. He immediately passes Tonnen's guard as he takes him down. Tonnen puts in like the octopus underhook and scrambles back, and Buchecha doesn't really have an answer to it. And then he tries it again later when Buchecha passes his guard again. Buchecha looks for the Dars. Tonnen works out of the Dars, doesn't get submitted by Buchecha, which is fairly impressive. And then at one point, Tonnen hits a Kimura from half guard and turns him over. Same one he hit against Zach Maxwell. I watched him like break a dude's shoulder with that the other day, and he's just like, sorry, after the match. It's really hilarious. But yeah, he turns Buchecha over with this Kimura. Can't like consolidate position, but it's just amazing because a lot of people give up on it quite early because there's that danger of getting hammerlocked. You know, if the other guy postures up, grips his hand together, he can arm lock you the same way, or shoulder lock you rather. But yeah, Tonnen hit the basic Kimura from guard against Buchecha and really threatened him with it. Oh, and there's a moment where he comes up on a single leg and almost takes Buchecha's back, but Buchecha runs off the mats. And running off the mats is the most annoying thing in any grappling sport. But both those matches, really worth a watch, good fun. Actually, the Roger one is not good fun until it is. There's like 10 minutes of shit and then it's a minute of excellence. Anyway, time to plug the Patreon. If you are a Patreon boy, or if you're not a Patreon boy, the Joe Lewis lecture is going up at the weekend, and I've really enjoyed researching it. He's always been one of my favourite fighters. There's an awful lot to it. You know, there's the race relations angle, there's the Nazis come in, which everyone enjoys in a story. But also there's just a good amount of talk about one of the hardest hitting and, you know, one of the most technically brilliant knockout artists of all time. The Bum of the Month Club, you know, Billy Conn. We've got stuff about Jersey Joe Walcott, who you know I love. Resnick just put out an amazing highlight of Jersey Joe Walcott, actually. Yeah, it's going to be a really fun one. So if you're not on the Patreon, get in on that. Depending on how things go, you know, while I'm talking to editors, if no one can pay me Fightland money, I may well go fully independent, start my own website, and expand the Patreon to cover all of that. And then I'll think of some more bonuses for people who invest in me. Or patronize me. Don't patronize me. Whatever the correct term is. And if you haven't bought Notorious, go over and get Notorious. It's really good. That's all I can tell you. If you're in the US, it is now out over there on Amazon. Hi, Jack. I started going back to do martial arts, and boxing has always been my number one passion, but I like the kicks from karate. My training place has several different classes, and I tried karate. I liked the challenge, the toughness. But when I saw the sparring, I thought it was fucking stupid that you cannot hit people in the face, but a fat dude can kick you in the face? It's just plain idiotic. People were being measured, yet there was a feeling of that if someone miscalculated, you would get a shin to the face. Also, it gives me the feeling of being in a cult-like thing. Also, kata seems useless, and the hands by the waist is just completely retarded. Please give me your opinion on karate. I think I will pass on karate for now. 2. I don't like BJJ, but it seems so effective that I feel I need to learn it, yet people like Faraz Sahabi is saying BJJ is not a great base for MMA. Your opinions, please. 3. Is Sambo a good base for MMA? Okay, let's slow this way down. Right, firstly, karate. Yes, there's a lot of stupid karate shit out there. Sounds like you're doing Kyokushin or something of the Kyokushin branch of karate. Typically, you're talking either traditional karate, which is more to do with point sparring and stuff, the sparring styles when they do it, and Kyokushin offshoots, which do the sort of knockdown karate, body punching legal, head punching illegal, kicking in the head fine. And then you've got the people who practice a bit of Goju-ryu or Uechi-ryu and get butthurt if you put the sparring into those two categories, but only spar like once every month, and you know, and they're like, oh, we're hard. They're the kind of people who get pissed off about you saying that there's two types of karate. We're talking about competitive styles, because the competitive meta is what things tend to go towards. But yes, it is a very silly style of sparring, the Kyokushin style, but it does produce tremendous kicking dexterity and, as you said, toughness. You know, you will learn to take a body shot doing Kyokushin style sparring. And a low kick. What you won't learn from that is what basically the other style of karate focuses on, which is being evasive and elusive. Because when you're playing for points, all strikes are created equal. You can throw up shit kicks or shit punches and still get the points for them. So it becomes more about not ever letting the guy touch you until you want to get in and try and touch him first. Which is good too, but again, because it finishes at the first point, what happens is that guys don't worry about exiting. So both styles of karate training are sort of defensively flawed when you start moving towards real full contact stuff. However, if you are also training your boxing and all that other stuff, karate's a great idea because that will teach you to... Well, firstly, nothing will teach you to take low kicks quicker than Kyokushin, because you're standing in a range where you're going to be taking them all the time rather than checking them most of the time. But if your gym has Muay Thai or kickboxing, those are also good options that will go in with your boxing. But do not be surprised when a lot of your boxing stuff doesn't fit with what the coach is telling you, because boxing is a sport all of its own. There's tons of stuff you can do in boxing, which is just mitigated completely by being able to kick the guy in the leg. Also, yes, kata as a practice is useless. It is fascinating as a historical document, because that's how things used to be hidden in plain sight. You'd have a guy do the kata for 5 years until you trusted him, and then you'd start telling him what the actual moves were. So there's tons of interesting stuff been done into studying forms in various martial arts, but as a practice, with the exception of things like Sanshin, which is an isometric practice, not really very useful. Also, yes, having your hands at your waist is retarded. If you're doing it strictly and religiously, yeah. Standing with your hands low can be useful for shooting faster shots from weirder angles, occasionally with more power. But, you really need an understanding of why the hand should be up in the first place. So yeah, there's a lot of problems with karate, but if you keep doing your boxing and you're enjoying your karate, just do both. Just means you'll have to suffer through a little bit of kata, but if you're at a Kyokushin place or something of that variety, you're probably going to be doing less kata than you would be at a more traditional place. One of those traditional styles. 2, I don't like BJJ. I love seeing stuff like this on like Reddit's martial arts forum. People being like, I don't like BJJ. I want to do catch wrestling or something else. And you're like, BJJ is now just grappling. Like, there is no... to a degree, there's things that come from catch wrestling and so on, but there is nothing stopping you taking that to a BJJ class and using it. The thing that BJJ is sparring. It's lots and lots of sparring. Whether you're doing a no-gi grappling class or a BJJ class, they're basically the same thing. All grappling is basically the same because you're testing it against other guys day after day. The things that are going to change it are the rules, so if you want to heel hook people... To be fair, not even like a lot of no-gi places are going to teach you to heel hook people until you're very good, because there is an inherent danger to those sort of techniques that they don't really like to teach very early. I mean, some schools will teach heel hook. There's a move towards that now, trying to get guys to understand it early so that they aren't as dangerous when you start training with them. But it will stint your game if you only work on heel hooks from day one. I don't know what Faraz said about BJJ. I'm assuming he meant as a base for MMA in terms of he would rather have a wrestler come in and teach them to grapple, or a talented kickboxer and teach them to grapple. But and I've seen this a lot lately. People being like, "Yeah, you don't need BJJ to be the best anymore." Tyron Woodley versus Woodley and Maia proved that, and Jon Jones versus whoever proved that, and they're both wrestlers. And you're like, "Well, no, they train BJJ all the time. They train grappling with BJJ black belts all the time." It is one of the most important training aspects of MMA. You aren't going to be able to just stop takedowns and work on your striking. You got to know the ground game inside and out. Sambo, I don't know a tremendous amount of about Sambo in terms of the rule set, but there's a lot of similarities to judo. They used to call it Russian judo way back in the day. People from the West talking about it. Basically, you're going to be dealing with throws, leg locks, and arm locks and shit. In fact, the Russian judo teams through the Olympics in like the 80s and 70s and 80s were very heavily influenced by the Sambo crossover. Great book in the Ippon judo series called Russian Judo, which just sort of focuses on the arm bars they were famous for, and a couple of over the back belt grip throws and suplexes and things like that. If you can find a good Sambo club, go join it. I mean, I'd love to learn some Sambo. If guys like Riley, Bodycomb? Is it Bodycomb? Yeah, just Riley, whatever. They do great stuff. His Top Rock series is amazing, and there's another one too. He's got a really interesting model where you basically pay what you want to use them, or to buy the DVDs or digital downloads. The thing about BJJ, and this is the thing that I've found, having trained in a lot of different like traditional martial arts and things like that, BJJ is not like a martial art. You know, there is... when you're talking to someone like Henna Gracie, there is a good deal of the marketing machine working, but if you're at a good gym, there are going to be guys rolling in from MMA clubs. There's going to be guys coming in from any place that does grappling. You know, you've got guys on the judo teams and all sorts of stuff. They'll be dropping in and out. You're going to be grappling with all sorts of different people all the time. The best thing about BJJ gyms generally is that there is this attitude of come and train, you know. The only thing that is really going to hold you up on is getting belts. If you're worried about your belt, then you'll have to stay with the same people for a while and get to know them, and they'll try and teach you their stuff, and you know, they'll assess your progress. But you can go from gym to gym and just learn by doing, basically. You know, you'll learn a couple of techniques each class, and then you'll spar for the rest of it in most places. There is no substitute for sparring, and that is what makes BJJ so great, or just grappling in general. If you just called it grappling, or luta livre, or whatever, the rules might change slightly, but the stuff is exactly the same. So don't let any of the stuff about the Gracies or the old school stuff get in the way and make you think that you don't like BJJ, because BJJ is just grappling. That's all you need to know. Like, it's grappling with some restrictions on leg locks, but later on, everyone's training for no-gi competitions now, so you're going to learn them. And of course, if your school competes at all, you're going to learn stand-up too. So find a BJJ class, try it, try and roll with the nastiest looking guys in the room, get your ass kicked, and then realise that coming back day after day is what's going to close the gap between you and them, not what the system's called or the belts or anything like that. It's getting good rolling in with experienced guys. Doesn't matter what the name of the martial art is. Cheers! Right, what we got going on this weekend? We've got a Mexico City card, which is headlined by flyweights, which is impressive. Sergio Pettis versus Brandon Moreno. Can't really tell you much about Brandon Moreno, but I do like Sergio Pettis. He was looking sharp against John Moraga, and he just does really interesting things. Like, when are you going to see a guy shake off a single with a quarter Nelson and then try and kick the guy in the head while still holding the quarter Nelson and the other guy standing up? So that's pretty cool. Got Alexa Grasso, who is the internet MMA community's darling. You know, the creepy sort of guys who are obsessed with WMMA love her, but she's also good fun. I saw her fight against Heather Jo Clark. Was it Heather Jo Clark? Her UFC debut. Who she fought since then? Oh god, yeah, she dropped that decision to Felice Herrick. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see her. She always looks small for the weight, so that'll be interesting. But she's got fairly good boxing. She had a good scrap with what's her name? Mizuki Inoue. But she's fighting Randa Marcus, who is basically just grappling. So if she can keep her off the mat, she can probably box her up. But she does have this habit of going straight back onto the fence. Then you got my boy Alan Joban versus Nico Price. Don't know anything about Price, but I do love watching Joban. He is a savage finisher when he gets it going. And then Sam Alvey's got a good chance to get a big name on his record with Rashad Evans. Rashad Evans should have retired a long time ago. The most embarrassing thing about the UFC rankings is that people were ranking him the top 5 light heavyweights right up until his comeback. Despite the fact that he had like 3 gimmies in a row after the Jon Jones fight. They gave him Little Nog, who can't deal with wrestlers, Dan Henderson, who was way old, and Chael Sonnen, who is not a light heavyweight. And he only won 2 of those gimme fights, and he almost lost the one to Henderson. So he's really been dropping off for a while. Lost that decision to Ryan Bader, got starched by Glover Teixeira, lost the decision to old man Dan Kelly. That was a split decision though. But, you know, it's pretty clear that he isn't the Superman that he once was. It's even more alarming that he couldn't get medically cleared to fight in New York or whenever that was. But, you know, he'll fight as long as he wants to. Jack Hermansson's on the card. I like that guy. Really interesting striking style. Rani Yahya is also on the card. If you haven't ever seen Rani fight, he's got like the most submissions by north-south choke, except maybe Jeff Monson. And a few years ago, I haven't checked this recently, but a few years ago he had the most sweeps recorded in MMA. And sweeps are pretty hard to get in MMA. You know, normally guys are just creating scrambles and trying to get back up. So that's a fun enough card. I can't imagine anyone's going to be watching for the main event, even though I'm always saying put the flyweights in the main event. Unless Sergio's fighting a bantamweight now. Can't remember. Anyway, not a particularly important event. And then you've got Bellator, which has Chidi Njoku, whose nickname is Chidi Bang Bang. So it's Chidi Chidi Bang Bang, which I really like. against Andrei Koreshkov, who is just a monster. Koreshkov coming off that loss to Lima. Lima is probably the best welterweight. Well, actually, no, we got Rory McDonald. He was for a long time the best welterweight outside the UFC. Not even going to talk about Ben Askren because he's not fighting anyone of note. They tried to announce his last opponent as a mystery opponent so that people would care. But unfortunately, he's not Fedor, so we can't spin whoever he is fighting next like we did Jaydeep Singh. Oh, but he's a world-class kickboxer. No, he's not. Oh, yeah, God, Lima KO'd him. I forgot about that. That was a great fight. Lima's guard looked really slick in that. But Koreshkov, really fun fighter, exciting on the feet, good wrestler, great top game, beat up Bendo, just looked like a giant against Bendo. And aside from the Lima loss and a loss to Askren back in 2013, he's pretty much flawless. Meanwhile, Chidi Njokuani is I believe the brother of Anthony Njokuani, who sort of dropped off the face of the earth, but I will always remember him for that knockout of Chris Hordecki as Hordecki was running away. Pretty hilarious. But he's doing good. He's not lost since 2013. Got no contest for elbow to spine, Christ. But he's on a good run recently. Yeah, really nice. Couple of KOs in his last few fights. Then he decisioned Melvin Gillard, and Melvin Gillard's case is getting sadder and sadder. My boy Izzy, who I know listens to the podcast, my boy Izzy Adesanya just fought Melvin Gillard, beat the snot out of him. But at the same time, Adesanya is a legit middleweight, and Melvin Gillard, welterweight, maybe big lightweight. His team are doing an awful job for him. They put him into the match with Chidi Njokuani, and that is a comical size difference between the two of them. Just got knocked out by Israel Adesanya, fought Muslim Sadakov. Just awful. He's on another 3 fights losing streak. They had him fight Jimmy Sweeney in bare knuckle boxing a little while ago, and apparently he did quite well. But yeah, it's just sad watching what Melvin Gillard has become because he had so much potential back in the day. Except when he kept getting rear naked choked. That was his one weakness, giving up his back and getting rear naked choked. But anyway, we're not here to talk about Melvin Gillard. We're here to talk about Chidi Njokuani. Then you got Brennan Ward versus Fernando Gonzalez on the co-main event. Brennan Ward, always fun to watch. Interesting to see how he recovers from that horrible flying knee KO against Paul Daly. Fernando Gonzalez, last fight was against Michael Venom Page, I believe. That was the one where Page had a foot of reach and a foot of height advantage, basically, and still did nothing for the entire fight. But it's okay, he's gone to boxing now. And there's my MVP rant of the week. AJ McKee's on the card against Blair Tuggerman, whoever the hell he is. And it's another Bellator card with 18 fights on, and I guarantee you something exciting will happen on the prelims and they won't record it. Yep, Colleen Schneider's there. She'll choke a girl out and they won't record it. That's what happened last time she fought. One of my girls, and I searched high and low for that footage and they just didn't even bother shooting it. But, we're about to enter a weird period of lull in the fights because it seems like the UFC's putting everything into McGregor-Mayweather or whatever. Be interesting to see how that turns out. I'll update you with whatever I decide I'm doing with my writing, and I reckon that'll do us for this week. If you haven't joined the Patreon, sign up. If you haven't got Notorious, give it a read. Don't mind if you buy it or not, but I'm pretty proud of it. And I'll catch you next week. Cheers.